Live.
Let me get
Live stream.
screen shared. Once I remember how to do it here, there it is. Let's start us off over in VS Code. Once I remember how to do it here, there it is. Let's start us off over in VS Code.
Okay, we are live.
Okay, yeah, I'm getting a little bit of a feedback loop, actually.
I muted things.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
it seems to stop.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Do you see my screen all right?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, so at the high level here, we made a little bit more room in our bundle size for the work here, not too much. We're really only about a kilobyte over, but I've been bumping it up in slightly larger increments. And we did introduce one new dependency here. This is to help with keyboard showing focus rectangles just when it's keyboard navigation to get to the focus. And not when you actually just click on an element. So little standard library there. So that's the only dependency updates. The messages just introduce a lot of the text changes that we did throughout. So I don't think there's a lot that's interesting to look at here, but that's in there. The formatter is just for on the results. We need to pass through the URL so that we can have this when we're rendering the results page. Otherwise, most of this is going to be in React land. So that's just a few of the things that touch outside of that. Let's start kind of at the, I'm going to kind of start with the root components and work our way down here. So app is the entry point for everything. So one of the key changes we made is we changed the analyzing page to be an overlay that we can actually show on top of the configuration page, or we can show on top of the results page if you go to run another scan from there. So that's still here, but we change how we use it. It's no longer in the pages collection. And we maintain a separate piece of state to track whether we're analyzing, since we could have a different page that's sitting behind us, depending on where we started. I've got kind of a to-do here, because as we've added a bit more state and a few different more callbacks, especially at the app level, this is ripe for a nice refactoring to use reducer, which we haven't done yet. So we're still mostly callback based at this point.
But that's for later, right?
Yeah, that's for later. We have enough churn going on with this change. I didn't want to pull that in at the same time, but it really would be a nice update for the top level state management as we're getting more here. Some of the stuff that we were doing to help start and stop analysis has moved to the analyzing component for actually adding, removing our listeners to the network, sending messages to the background script to tell it to start or when we're done. So the amount of kind of side effect hookups have been reduced at the top level and offloaded to that component instead. Otherwise, you can see we've just reduced the number of pages we have. We plopped analyzing out of there, and now it conditionally shows as an overlay in front of whatever our current page is. So a lot of things get touched to kind of make that diff, but it's actually not too bad.
Do you want to show the extension? I don't think that Sivan has seen it in action before.
Sure, let's jump over to that for a second. We'll do a quick demo.
It's looking pretty good.
Got to find, I got to stop sharing this one, and then I can start sharing that one. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so this is the current version, the extension after this PR. We're just running it against webhint here. So I was mentioning the keyboard accessibility earlier. So like if I go and actually click on the checkboxes, we're not getting focus recs. But if I start tabbing through, we have focus rec just for that keyboard bit. There's a small update in here actually that we didn't have quite correct before. When you would tab through here, it would hit the input field and cause you to actually change the value of that radio group, which isn't the correct UI interaction. So I fixed that while I was in here. Until the radio option associated with that input has been selected, it's tab index -1 now. But that changes when if you manually focus it, will still change the value, and then you can get back to the radio. You use arrow keys actually to switch the radio. So just getting some of that interaction to be correct, consistent with other expected UI behavior. Let's go ahead and just run a scan here, and we'll see our new analyzing overlay in front. And then we get to the results page. So at this size, we have the summary off to the left. So we can expand, see different results. We brought the button to inspect, kind of just attached to the code snippet. So if I click that, that would jump me over to the Elements tab. If we click the URL with the line and column position, that jumps us over to the Sources tab, just as it did before. And then the summaries we have over here on the left. So you can see that we've got this sticky position now, so we can still see that as we scroll through. I can use it to jump back up to accessibility or jump down to a different category. Just like with the, so then there's show past hints, which actually reminds me I didn't get the hit area fixed on that. So it's still extending into this whole space. Hey, Anton, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple notes while we're going through here, I want to fix this one. Hit area should just be around the label here. But this is a new control that we've introduced so that you can filter down to just the hints that didn't pass. So you can focus on just the things you might need to update or change. We also here have the keyboard accessibility, so you can drill through, get to the different items. When one's open, you'll drill down inside of it, all that fun jazz. Then if we get a little narrower, you can see, we'll go ahead and drop the summary so that we can have a bit more space to display the results. So it's just at 768 pixels is where the threshold is. A similar thing for the layout when we're configuring a new scan. If I jump back here, we'll max out at a certain width, at which point we'll just kind of let them keep the spacing. And then below a certain width, we'll go ahead and switch to a vertical layout so that we can render quite a bit more narrow, depending on how the current dev tools might be sized. And I guess the only other piece to show here, I mean, other than the fact that I could actually scan right from this page, so we still keep that page in the background. Go ahead and cancel that. Let's look. If I go and switch, we can see we've got all this stuff available in light theme as well.
Are you going to try to fix the text position of restore defaults or for another PR?
Wait. Oh, right. Yeah, make a note on that one. I actually forgot about that, Anton.
Yeah,
that text is riding a little high just because of how the element was positioned. Siobhan, did you have something?
No.
Okay. Otherwise, most of the links here are links out. So they're going to be external, opening a new tab with the related documentation. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to look at this point. I think that pretty much covers it. Anything you're thinking of, Anton, I might have forgot here?
Error page, but I don't know how you can force it.
Yeah, I did test that. You know, actually, I have one active bug. I think I can force it here just due to one bug we haven't fixed yet. Let's see here. Give me just a second. So I don't know if it's all MDN pages, but a few of them had a state that caused us to pass a selector to our internal selectors library that wasn't valid, because they actually have a colon in a class name on some of the elements. And we still need to update to handle that. So let's see if this one will break it. If that particular class, yeah, cool. So that's on this page. And yeah, basically, if you dig down there, it's broken inside of our selectors library. And apparently, I did not get the details and summary on this page. Anton, you want to take a note of that one?
Yep.
I didn't get the focus rect on the error details summary element. Otherwise, it's mostly there.
And open an issue links to the right template, right?
Yep.
Nice.
Let me just get out of there. Okay, now I think we've covered all the stuff here. Let's get back to the code. All right, VS Code back up there for you. All right, so app level, that's fine. The CSS, there's a lot more variables now. There's still some of this that we'll probably want to kind of improve the naming of over time, I think. But the key thing is that we're not having a bunch of colors down deep. So most of the color part of the theming and font sizes and a few other pieces are up here at the top level, which should make it a little easier to extract this into different top level themes as we adjust to different design systems depending on the browser we're running in, because right now we just have light and dark in more of the Fluent design system. So not a lot of overrides for just dark. And then one of the other key changes here is pushing more of these kind of descendant level styles down into custom components instead. So instead of just styling all anchors, we have our own link components we're using. Actually, most of the time they're external link components, which also helps because we have a certain pattern of HTML attributes we want to use on those. In fact, I'll pop over to that just so that we can see that as an example. So by using an external link component, we can make sure all of our external links are properly using no opener, no referrer when we're targeting blank. And then the common CSS for that, which also sets up our focus behavior. This is an interesting little pattern to note, just kind of a recommended best practice with the library we've used. It's not strictly necessary. the way that we're consuming it and the limited targets we have. But if we were writing this more in a way where we needed to worry about progressive enhancement, this is the pattern that would enable it more. I mean, our extension UI isn't really going to be running in a context where we can't use the library that we pulled in.
Okay.
So it's not strict, like I said, not strictly necessary, but not a big deal.
That's the root focus.
Yeah, so there's a pseudo selector :focus visible that I don't think is implemented without a flag anywhere yet. Chrome has it behind a flag. Firefox has something similar called Moz focus ring.
Mm-hmm.
There's a spec behind this, but the idea is that it's a focus state where you would apply your styles only if the browser would have normally shown a focus rect or a focus ring, instead of just anytime the elements focus. So it matches more with that. Only show the focus rect when there's keyboard interaction in order to trigger it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I was saying, the pattern of still setting it on regular focus and then kind of negating it if the class wasn't present is just a way of kind of doing more progressive enhancement if for some reason the library couldn't load, or if you were actually using the native pseudo selector, it's a way of like, okay, well, I want it to be conditional, but I'm okay if it just always shows on focus on browsers that don't have the focus visible pseudo selector. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So you'll see this pattern in a number of the different controls as we go through here. All right, so at the app level, let's go through the different pages. So config. Refreshing my memory a little bit. Okay, so one of the things that with switching analyze to be an overlay, each of the pages can potentially be behind, but we don't really want them to be interactive while they're behind the analyzing overlay. So I introduced a disabled property that we plumb down to each of the pages, and that gets passed on to the page that each of those contains. That's an interesting thing to look at right here. And that gets set on a new field set so that any inputs that are in those pages while we're analyzing are actually rendered disabled. But we're not changing configs and items while we're running. We're not displaying a header here anymore, so that's why that got removed. That's just a design change, which also means there's not an action associated with that header, so those were removed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, back to config here. A little bit of just directory restructuring on some of the items to make it a little easier to follow when we're actually going in and looking at the full list. So if I collapse this down a bit here on the left, the big new one is controls. So now we have a bunch of kind of more atomic or basic controls that we're using throughout the UI so that we can bring kind of tailored behavior on top of just the styling we may have been using. So the new radio buttons, checkboxes, progress bar, just kind of all those different elements that we can tailor to the design system we're using. Anton, I know you've seen the checkbox stuff a bit.
Yes.
But this is slightly interesting in how we set up the types for it. Since we want this to be based on an input, but we always want type checkbox, generally we're allowing any component that includes this to still pass any of the other attributes that would have been valid on an input. but we're omitting the type attribute since we've set that one. So not only do we actually not assign it, but we at the TypeScript level, we're ensuring that if you try to specify like checkbox type equals, it's going to complain at the compiler level. And these are kind of some fun little pieces of TypeScript code. Element props here is another little helper to get the props that a given React element would have supported. I'll click over to here for a minute so we can look at both of these. Element props isn't too complicated. Those props come off of JSX intrinsic elements in the TypeScript space. And so we're really just, all of the keys in there are all the different element names. And so we're allowed, by passing the actual tag name of the element, we can filter to which props are allowed. And we just save ourselves a little bit of repetitiveness by having a helper type defined here. And then omit is using two different TypeScript built-ins. One is excluding the keys, and then pick is helping us map that to properties and just keep what we need here. A couple examples in the documentation there as well. But for the most part, you don't have to worry about how they work as long as you know what they do. So we can take any of the native element props for input, and then we can strip off any of the specific properties we don't want to allow in our own props. And we'll use that in a few different places. Checkbox, radio, and toggle all make use of that. So yeah, very similar to checkbox is the toggle control. It looks like this one did not actually get fully migrated. Anton, you got a note on that one?
Yeah, I'm writing it right now. So toggle needs to be migrated.
Yeah, it should be using, so yeah, this is sort of what we were saving with that helper, because this was part of the earlier approach to deriving from them that was getting really verbose and repetitive. And also before figuring out I could pull those straight off of JSX intrinsic props or intrinsic elements. Yeah. Okay, and then our valid input control, which we had before, also moved up here into the controls folder. It hasn't really changed much versus what it was before, other than adopting the slightly new syntax. Similarly, the earlier example we showed just allowed you to strip out props if you need to add any. It's just a quick union, or I guess intersection type. To bring on the extra properties. Okay. Styling wise, this is also one that where it's not necessarily as critical for the context in which we're being used in, but to ensure that we can scale our UI if the users' chosen font size changes were largely based on rem units. And so I've included comments here just expressing what pixels those match to.
Do you want to explain the mask?
Oh yeah, mask, that was a fun bit here. So yeah, Anton and I were having some discussion about how we could use an SVG that we had, which is probably, yeah, this is going to render a source. Can I get a preview of that by chance?
You need to install an extension.
Okay. So yeah, we had a particular check mark we want to use in the checkboxes. We have an SVG for that, but the challenge is we want to use it as a background image. So if we go into the CSS, or we originally wanted to use it as background image, but we couldn't color it. Because you can only style SVGs that are inline. We couldn't stick the SVG inline inside of the input control. So it needed to be applied via CSS as a background image or something similar. And yeah, a couple web searches later, and even after we found this, then Anton, what, you'd run across someone tweeting about the same solution like hours later.
Yep.
But yeah, if we apply a mask, basically, so we set the background color to the color we want the check mark to be, and then we use the SVG outline as a mask against that background, so we get the shape in the color that we want. It only works for things that are monotone, but that's all we have here, just a single color SVG image. So,
Okay.
So yeah, it's a little trick so that now this can follow our theme without having to have multiple image files.
Nice. But it works for only monocolor images, monocolor elements.
Yeah, I mean, because we're completely ignoring the colors defined in the SVG, it's really just using the opaque layer as a mask. So if you had multiple colors that were significant, it would just kind of be as if you had flattened those all into a single path.
Okay.
Works well for basic iconography, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, we were talking about the focus stuff, is this class name is, so we're using CSS modules for all of our styles. So every class name you see in here, you see I'm repeating root over and over again, because when we actually generate code from this, that's going to have, it's going to be checkbox underscore root underscore like 5 random hashed characters to ensure that the selector is unique to that component, regardless of what other selectors are in the file. The library we're using to help with focus visible is not setting classes that are derived from CSS modules. So we have to escape that world just slightly to say that this is a global class name, so that this class name doesn't get mangled, converted to that format.
Yeah.
Okay. Were there any of the other controls, Anton, you wanted to look at while we were here? Otherwise, I think I'll kind of go back to the layout notion and work our way down from the top.
Yeah, no, that is working more.
Okay, so back to config. Okay, let me get back to the actual pull request so we can see the diff here. Other than renaming, we brought in the disabled property. Looks like the formatter added an extra space on a few of those, and then just restructured how these are grouped a little bit. The CSS here is what's more interesting. So I've been trying to move. There's 2 pieces here with layout. One was a really good principle that isn't fully followed throughout all of this code, but it's one I've read about recently that I think is a really good idea, which is generally, as you build components, try to keep margins out of the child components and let it be controlled by the parent container that's actually laying out a section. So, you know, if you're setting up your, actually, this is a good reason to jump back over to like radio and checkbox for a moment. So what you won't notice here is any explicit settings of margins based on some notion of where this control might get used. You know, it's very trimmed to just the pieces we need for the control. And then grid makes that a little bit easier as we compose these to kind of set up a gap where in the past we might have used margins and you do the fun hacks with, it's like, okay, I've got a margin left on everything except the first element, or a margin bottom on everything except the last element. Yes, you've done this. So using gap with grid does more of what you wanted in the first place.
Yeah. So no hacks needed.
Yes. No need for the hacks. And it's nice too, because that gap can be defined at the parent level, not at the child level,
Okay.
which follows that same principle of trying to, leave all the layout control to the parent component that's laying things out and away from the children that are just being composed.
Yeah.
And so, yes, our config page here. So this is for those categories that we have where for all the inputs, we have those 3 categories. So we're just laying that out in a grid. And we've got sort of that. So this sets up, 2 things. One was that threshold for so the default grid flow is row. So that what we set up here is going to stack vertically. That's more of our condensed, or you dare say mobile style layout. And then once we hit our 768 pixel threshold, then we're going to flow them horizontally across the columns instead. And then the grid itself, we're going to cap at a max width of 900 pixels. And so that's how we got that behavior I showed earlier, where you'd stretch it and then eventually it stops spacing out between those columns and everything would just kind of stay right aligned. If you want to see that again, I can switch windows real quick just to kind of have a visual to go along with what we're talking about here. Anton?
No, I didn't.
I'm okay.
Okay.
Shivam?
I remember that. Yes.
Okay, good. And then, so this one's one, like the powered by, which is the link powered by webhint sitting at the bottom, is still set with a margin, but these styles are being applied by the parent control as opposed to the child control. In this case, it's just done by passing down a class name to that component. So if I get down here, yeah, powered by, we're passing down our own class name to get attached to whatever element it uses internally. And we're only setting those margin styles on our class name, where internally, it doesn't even have its own class that it's setting. It's just structured to have the message and an external link. But if it had some of its own intrinsic styles, it could have merged this with a styles.root like we see in some of the other controls like radio here. So that's what you'll see on some of these. We're allowing an extra class name to come down from the parent component, but we still have our own class name we want to attach. All right. Okay, so that was config. Analyze is kind of a fun one. So as I said, we had this as a page before. It's taken on a little bit more responsibility. So it actually, instead of just being an interstitial page, it's helping us out with a little bit of the communication with the background script. This helps tie the life cycle of our interaction with the background script to just while we say we're analyzing. It does mean it needs to receive the config because it's now the control that's going to pass the config onto the background script to kick off the analysis. And then those network listeners and sort of start and stop messages I was talking about that we removed from the app component now live here as an effect. And then Shivang, are you familiar with hooks, React hooks?
I've been just using the, I'm familiar with these names, but I've not used them as of now.
Okay, so use effect here. Have you done then the class-based React components?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll compare it to that. So use effect here is sort of a replacement in hooks for some of the different life cycle methods like component did mount, component did unmount, component did update.
Yeah. Okay.
But it allows you to kind of group well, there's only one override you could do for each of those in a component. So if you have multiple different concerns you're trying to handle, you kind of have to spread them between those different places. Here you can kind of have it all in one place. You can even have multiple use effects for different kind of potentially unrelated pieces of updates, which is nice because then you can even take this and you can extract it out into custom hooks and completely remove them from the component as well, which I haven't done for this particular one here, but it gives us that option. And so what's going to happen here is we have this side effect that's going to hook up our events and tell the background script to start analyzing for us. And then we return kind of our deregistration so that when you need to clean up, or basically when you need to run this effect again, this is how you tear down, tell that it's stopped. Now, if this second param here are the dependencies for the effect, basically the pieces of data we're using internally. And so if this is what, if it changes, would cause us to run things again. Now, we don't change config while the analyzing panel is up, but it is a piece of data we have a dependency on here. If this is just empty, it's this pretty much exactly the same as running this once when the component mounts and then running the cleanup when the component unmounts, which is effectively still the same behavior we're getting here. We're just calling out that we do have that dependency on config. So when we mount, we're gonna, when the analyze panel actually gets added to the app control, we'll register our network listeners and we'll tell the background script to enable with the provided config. And then when we're done and we actually get unmounted, then we'll remove those listeners. And if for some reason, in case we were canceled, we'll also tell the background script that we're done. Okay. Some of the other stuff in here that didn't get touched are fun pieces like this delay that actually ensures that even if we're done, if you start scanning and even if we're done in like 30 milliseconds, we'll still wait a few seconds to give you a chance to see the interstitial UI before we rip it away from you. So it's not quite a blip. So we're not trying to always run as fast or give the UI the perception that we're always running as fast as we possibly can. We want it to kind of feel like a smooth experience. Otherwise, there's just a few more, some structure changes here because our previous version of the page was pretty simple. So we now have a separate header and a middle section that groups the message off to the left with the image of our narwhal off to the right, and a progress bar that we didn't have before. And then we still have a button for canceling. And layout-wise, you'll see that this one got quite a bit more going on. Specifically, we're setting up a lot of styles to make that overlay look nice. And you'll also see that we're using grid again here to group items so that we can kind of control the layout all in one spot. There's two grids actually going on. We have the root grid, which is vertically stacking our three areas, the header, the center status, which has the message and the image, and then the actions at the bottom, which has our cancel button. And then the status is what has the, let's see. Sorry, it's just double checking this. Okay, oh, nope, 3 layers. Sorry, the root one is setting up the overall overlay. So that's the, what's sitting in front of whatever page is behind. Status is the rectangle that's in the center, and that's split into the 3 vertical sections. And then messages is what's the middle one with the image that's split 50-50 with the message on the left and the image on the right.
What?
Huh?
Yeah, I was thinking, what happens when you run this narrow? We've seen the responsiveness in the configuration and in the results, but not while this is being analyzed.
This one doesn't go quite as narrow. It doesn't have as much width. So, I mean, the actual analyzing one, it was already, the layout's a lot narrower than the other panels were. But I did not adjust this one to try to get to ultra narrow widths. You'll end up just kind of floating a little bit off the edge, I believe, if you really go narrow.
Okay, I'll just put it as an issue that we will eventually fix or not.
Mm-hmm. Good question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I spent a fair amount more time fine-tuning the panels that stay up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Side note here, this is one of the places there actually exists just for the shadow and that overlay, some colors that haven't been hoisted to the top level yet. I'd like to see those changed. I consider that sort of a long-term to-do, is we keep taking more of those theme-based styles and move them up. Where it really starts to matter is the moment you actually want to change it to something different. And so some of these can be handled the very first time we actually want to do that, at which point I think the idea is that our habit becomes, okay, we want this color to be something else in a different theme. Let's extract it to a CSS variable as part of doing, instead of trying to do something different. Okay, and let's get to, well, we can make a stop at the error panel since we looked at that. Other than the fact that I need to, so you can clearly see I haven't done any custom styling on the details and summary, which would be why I didn't get the focus rect that I was looking for there.
Okay.
But otherwise, the main addition here was with the removal of the header that we had in the old design, we did have a need to have those two actions to either start up a new scan or to get back to the configuration. So those were brought down in here. And then the naked anchor here was just converted to one of our external link controls.
Which reminds me, have you opened an issue in MDN for the comma selector or not?
Well, no, that's our bug.
That's a bug on our side. Okay.
I mean, they're using it in an interesting way, but we're the ones who are trying to turn it into a selector. Specifically, what's happening is we're trying to. Oh, I just noticed we lost Siobhan.
Yep. Hopefully he can rejoin.
Specifically, what's happening is we're trying to. Oh, there he is. We're trying to find the related element for a report. And so we build a selector from the data on that element to try to find it in the original HTML source that came over the wire. And it uses the class names that were present on that element, one of which was written with a colon.
Okay. And is that?
Which can't be represented in a selector, but it's not actually being used as part of a selector. It's not an invalid character in the attribute. So it depends on how you squint at it. But,
so we make a pitfall for that?
Huh?
Do we make a pitfall for that?
A pitfall?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Because, I mean, Okay.
Yeah, it looked like it was part of some sort of kind of helper library for a code sample. I believe the actual selector or the actual class name was brush : with a few other class names to represent a brush that was being applied to that particular control.
Okay, I'll make a note and then we can decide if we open a pitfall or not for that.
But yeah, all it really means is that it's there are certain class names you can author that you cannot write selectors for. Another really good one is if you write a class name with a dot, right? If you put a dot in a class name, you cannot write a selector that's actually going to find that element.
All right, I have a note for that.
Okay, so that was error. Let's get over to results. So results also pulls in the powered by to show at the very bottom. The summary is new, and then we took the header information. Now that we don't have the shared header across all pages, so now results has its own header control that's brought up here. And then the new, we used to only restart. So we saw this in a couple other places too, where you just go back to the configuration page. Now that's a true restart with a separate callback for configure. And these are the things where, you know, if we switched over to use reducer, we could pass dispatch down or set it as part of context and actually not have to pass down individual callbacks, but instead we could call dispatch saying, okay, start a new scan. You know, here's my message, type scan or type configure, and then let the reducer take care of the actions on the other side. It puts a little bit more boilerplate up at the top level, but then it simplifies the rest of the hierarchy. So we have a little bit of state here that we're maintaining just for that toggle to show or hide past hints. And then we have two different, so we also have then a filtered set of categories to just be the ones that are shown or that have hints that are shown in them, because we fully remove the category from the results if all the hints under the category passed. Otherwise, we have the results header, and then we have the new summary area. We're off to the left side here, and that's always showing all of the categories. So you can see that's still results.categories. And then the shown categories is used in the actual results area. And this one drills down. We have component for the results, which uses components for the hints, which uses components for the individual problems reported by a hint. So I'm not going to spend too much time on each of those because they haven't changed a lot, but I will drill down for just a second. So let's get to category results first. And okay. Yeah, this isn't actually the diff view, but the main thing that's new here is we've ID'd the div with the title of the category. This is to support linking from the summary.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just wanting to, there we go. So yeah, we brought in that ID, so a little div wrapper there. And then shown hints now we've filtered down. So if there's still some under the given category that we're showing, still may not be all. So we filter down the list of hints if show past has been set. Otherwise, a lot of the rest of this is going to be spending time in CSS, where we've just tweaked a lot of, I mean, most of the CSS here, we've just rewritten. There's not much that we've kept as far as this change goes. So it's going to, lots of diffs in these particular areas.
All right.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else here that's worth taking a look at. See, what was the diff on the background script? All right, that's just passing through that new URL. And that's in tests anyway. There was another test update here since we did change class names and stuff around. And as we were mentioning, when we were looking at the analyzing panel, we actually changed how we were interacting with registering network listeners. Mm-hmm. That highlighted a bug in the test case where we weren't mocking that correctly at all. It wasn't in the right spot. We just weren't invoking it as part of the test pass before. Now we were. Okay. So if that needed to get moved to be in the right location for that API, mm-hmm. The URL needed added. And then some of those selectors that were actually trying to target some of the class names, I've made them a bit more robust by targeting different information that should be a bit more stable. Mm-hmm. I mean, we only, for any given page that we're showing, we only have one submit button. And then of course, if we're wanting to target the accessibility category, finding the checkbox with the value accessibility is a nice way to go do that rather than rely on it being the first labeled one.
Do you have to disable the end-to-end test or not? Or is it passing in your?
It passes for me. I don't know why that was failing in your PR. We should look into that.
Well, it fails for me locally. It fails for me. Maybe it's only failing on Mac.
That's possible.
I don't know. Okay, yeah, we'll look into it later. I mean, it wasn't finding the panel of the DevTools, so.
Okay, yeah, no, that end-to-end test that actually loads up the true extension still works for me.
Yeah, I love when things behave differently.
Works on my machine. We're done.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had a few of those these last couple of weeks.
I'm trying to think if there's any other ones. Some of these were move files that the diff is showing it as all new, but really it was moved with a few minor changes. Progress bar was kind of fun. I should spend a minute on this one because styling progress bars is a pain. And, you know, I mentioned there's a few different principles I'm trying to stick to with putting this together. I mentioned one about we're trying to have any layout related stuff or not part of a component in terms of margins that would affect things outside of it. Internal layout's fine, right? But anything externally affecting layout, we want to keep apart from the component. Another one is sticking, you know, if we've got a good semantic element available, we want to use it because that's going to make it more accessible. Just sometimes those aren't as easy to style as we'd like them to be. And progress bar is certainly a good example of that. We have two places we care about right now being able to style it in. We need to be able to style it in Chromium-based browsers, and we need to be able to style it in Gecko-based browsers. And so we'll have a mix of WebKit and Moz in here. Fun details are Chromium supports before and after on the progress element. So you actually can create elements there, but it won't turn off some of the pseudo elements. So you still have to get in there. So targeting WebKit progress bar is really to just get it out of the way. Yeah. This is sort of the background element, but yet the actual root element also has a background. And that's what we're styling because that's more shared between platforms. WebKit breaks it down into a WebKit progress bar and a WebKit progress value. Gecko only has a Moz progress bar for our pseudo elements to target. So basically, WebKit progress value and Moz progress bar are the similar pieces that we're targeting across the two. Ignore the fact that these two are named very similar. They don't represent the same part of the control.
Yay for standardization.
Yeah, who knows? I have not looked up which came first or anything like that. So The other fun bit is, since these selectors aren't going to be recognized, even though I want to style these the same, I have to break them apart, because otherwise I kill the entire selector and neither browser wants to recognize the block. So not quite as convenient as how fallback works for multiple CSS properties. I would like that if it was comma separated, we just throw out just the one comma separated portion of the selector, but in practice, that doesn't appear to be how it works. Which, oddly enough, I didn't remember until I was in here doing this. And so in the indeterminate case, we're just wanting to actually run an animation. But yeah, there's a fun comment here. WebKit progress value, which would be the pseudo element that we'd be using, doesn't support animation. Like, just CSS animations don't work on it. So, which is fine. When you're in an indeterminate state, it happens to have like a width of -100 and doesn't render anywhere anyway without doing like bang important overrides, because the styles are inline written on the pseudo control. So it's really best to just steer clear of it in the indeterminate state anyway. So because with Chromium we can use before and after, we bring that in to actually do our indeterminate animation. Now this is implemented as such that it does work as a determinate progress bar as well. We don't have any of those in our UI currently, but yeah, so and you want to, I don't know if it'll, oh cool, I'm going to make a note here. I think that's left over, the bang important there is left over from when I was trying to get this working with WebKit progress value. Try to get that out of my CSS as much as possible.
Same in line 38 or not?
That one might be necessary, but it's a good one to double check. I believe that one, actually I'm almost certain, well, I know it needs to be specified. I don't know if it has to be important. Okay. Yeah, fun piecing some bits of that together. That is the progress bar.
Not bad. Not bad.
Yeah, I still open to tips on how to organize some of that to make it a little easier to read the first time through, but
yeah, I don't know. You're the expert, so.
I will say React makes this stuff, and using stuff like React and CSS modules is a much better experience than some of the other stuff, but it's still possible to write hard to read code in anything, right?
Yep.
Label here is pretty simple. So actually, this is one I meant to change. I forgot to get around to. I'll make a note of this one too. This could be done with grids so that we don't have to use a nested, the descendant selector for the first child input, which, I mean, in practice isn't too bad at this point, but if you ended up nesting the wrong control inside of it, you could end up bleeding styles into something you didn't want to.
Have you uploaded the current bundle to the PR or not yet?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, then I created the account in the Firefox add-on store. So I'll try to publish 0.01 version and sign it.
Okay. And then have you added me to that account already, or?
So it needs to be, it's only per email. So I use the official webhint IO one. So I'll share the credentials and passwords later with you.
I think there's a way to still add additional, at least from when I was reading the documentation, you're supposed to be able to add additional contributors.
Okay, I'll look into that. I created one with the webhint IO one. So it's like the team one. I'll look in if I can add. I mean, I did that in 5 minutes. So I just focus on creating the API tokens and all of that and see how we can get the sign bundle. But I'll look into that later.
So once we're using grid for label control. So to get the vertical line right, I introduced a little bit of an intermediate control just for text inside of a label next to an input like a checkbox or a radio. But as I was converting more of the layout to grid, it became apparent I could avoid that if we just changed the label control itself to be a grid layout with a gap, because I can I can align items center, and I don't have to reach down. So it gets rid of more code. So another opportunity for some cleanup. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of UI here, but there really is when you dig into it. There's a lot of just individual components.
Well, just for looking at the changelog, I mean, TSX, 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 CSS, more TSX, more CSS. Yep.
I mean, part of that is also keeping it contained, so each thing is relatively small. We're not doing a lot with each component, which is nice, because as they do start to get larger, and I think, what really makes it different from more of a static templating experience is that notion that you're still wanting to keep the structure and then update it. And if you're trying to do that with the raw DOM, good luck on not getting out of sync. I've been there.
Yep. Okay. Is there something else that you want to show?
Poking through, but I don't think there's anything else that is jumping out at me at the moment.
Okay. For the notes that I have, do you want to fix those?
So I'm okay if I don't think there was anything that came up here that was critical. I mean, there were things we wanted to fix, but we can track those as bugs.
Okay. Yeah, then maybe I'll start what we discussed, like having this epic or browser extension issues, and then we can have a list in there, and when we start tracking it,
yeah, and I think the other thing that's good with leaving some of those for bugs too is they're a good excuse for other people to dig in and kind of understand how more of this is structured, just like David was starting to do as he started this PR before he had to take off.
Okay. Yeah, then I'll create that. It was an item for Friday, but we can probably solve that right now.
Okay.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much. Sivan, do you have any questions or comments?
No, it was good to see you talk, jam on this thing.
Cool. I'm glad you could join us.
Yeah. Happy to be a part.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks
Talk to everyone later.
Bye.